Thanks for coming to the Neighborhoods Pods workshop. This is probably, well, we've been doing this for a while now, and Hayes and I are really excited to bring this to y'all on behalf of People's Council of Texas, which is a libertarian municipalist organization based on the idea of building up really strong communal bonds in our neighborhoods and working together to make our lives bring more aspects of our lives under the control of the people living in our neighborhoods. So I am Ian, also known as Neighbor Democracy, and y'all can find me on YouTube at Neighbor Democracy or Neighbor Democracy, and you can find me on Twitter at Industrial Democ.
Yeah, and my name is Hayes. I co-present this meeting with Ian every other week. And yeah, I'm just really excited to do this as well. And I'm happy to have you guys here.
Awesome. All right. So we'll just dive right in. This is how to start a neighborhood pod. And before we go too much further, we should probably explain what a neighborhood pod is. So a neighborhood pod is just kind of a name that has become popular to describe a hyperlocal coordination of neighbors. And it's initially about 5 to 30 households to get to know each other, for the people within a neighborhood pod to share resources with one another, and eventually take decisions on issues that affect them. So 5 to 30 households, we arrive at that number because it's well under what's called Dunbar's number, which is like supposed to be the maximum number of people that can effectively get to know each other on a face-to-face first name basis. So eventually, that 5 to 30 households number isn't set in stone. It might be nice to get up to that 150 people number, which is what Dunbar's number is. But we found that 5 to 30 households is a nice place to start. It's, not too intimidating. And so depending on where you live, you might find that it takes just the one block that you live on to get to that many people, or you may find that it takes talking to several blocks or your whole building to reach that number. If you live in an apartment, it's going to be different. But yeah, whatever that 5 to 30 households number, you can kind of walk to kind of map out where your pod might be. So healthy neighborhood pods are based on trust, and that's what a lot of this work is going to be, building up that trust. So neighborhood pods create the space for people to be able to rely on their immediate community rather than outsourcing problems to separate entities. And we believe that's kind of where, that's why trust is so important, because we're relying on each other. And so we're getting to know each other really on that first name basis. So here are a couple pictures and, contrasting two different worlds. So the concept of neighborhood pods is something that has existed for quite a while. They grew out of the just mutual aid groups that have existed since, I believe, Hurricane Katrina or before. Mutual aid has always existed, but the terms of neighborhood pods have existed for a very long time. But I think during the COVID-19 pandemic, that's when they really took off. And our approach on neighborhood pods is different than other places, but it's all kind of based on similar stuff. So I think people were attracted to these neighborhood pods because they really provide some hope of a community self-reliance in a time that a lot of us were feeling some real uncertainty about the future, right? So for some of us during the COVID-19 pandemic, for the first time in our lives, for some of us, right, we're seeing empty grocery store shelves, the closure of many places that we may have frequented. I know, if you're a music fan, concerts and festivals, which might make up part of your identity, are shut off, right? So it's just a reminder of how much of our security, our livelihoods, and our supply chain we have outsourced to entities outside of our neighborhoods that we as neighbors have much less say and control over. Neighborhood pods provide a solution to those problems because they encourage us to turn to the people around us and discuss how we can take care of each other and rely less on these like giant institutions that, you know, as we've seen during the pandemic, that can really plunge us into uncertainty on a dime. So there are a lot of examples of how, you know, elderly people, people with pre-existing conditions, people with disabilities were able to use pod-like structures to get the aid they needed directly from their neighbors during the pandemic. And that can also become a feature beyond the pandemic to make the places we live more safe, more accessible for everyone. They can also help neighbors better assess needs that would often go unmet, you know, during a pandemic, after a pandemic, or, you know, even before the pandemic, right? And begin to handle their own affairs like reconciliation, mental health support, or community safety. Hayes, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I don't have anything to add.
Awesome.
Okay. So pods are kind of about how we show up for each other. Kind of interdependence is a theme that's really integral to this idea. And one of the this quote embodies this main idea kind of really concisely. It says, "We are responsible for one another." That doesn't mean we can heal someone or make them accountable, though. They have to own a commitment to those things, but it does mean being there. It means not avoiding people when they experience trauma, illness, violence, or pain that we find hard or scary. It means not abandoning people to their relentless pain and hurting. Okay. Making sure everyone is included is also really important. It kind of just goes hand in hand with that, how we show up for each other. Pods allow communication between your neighbors who experience discrimination based on race, gender, disability, mental illness, neurodivergence, sexual orientation, victims of patriarchal abuse, etc. These are people that, for one reason or another, might not have shared these things with you or with other neighbors before, and having like a network between each other might just make that more accessible for them. The neighborhood pod should include spaces where marginalized people can meet together autonomously from as soon as you start your pod to ensure that everyone's needs are met. This is not an issue of political correctness, but making sure that every person in your pod has space to be heard. So what that means is that it's not just lip service. This is about kind of like direct action to make sure that your neighbors are being taken care of in a way that they might need somebody else to help them with, or in a way that makes more sense to have like a network be involved in. It's also just good to know, you know, all your neighbors and things that they might need help with or struggles that they might be facing. Do you have anything to add, Ian?
No, thanks.
Cool.
So there's this principle that I think is, it's a truism, right? It's like we all know it in our hearts. This idea that no one knows what you and your neighbors need better than you and your neighbors yourselves. So that's what the pods are based on, and that's why we're organizing hyperlocally. Now, so if we're giving this presentation, that doesn't mean that we know it all or that we're experts. We're actually just building on this collaborative totality of knowledge that's been shared with us by many people who've started their own pods, who are doing this work on the ground, this real local knowledge. So your experiences could help make this project better. So we would love, you know, your ideas, your criticisms, all of that. So I want to make sure that I stress, though, that neighborhood pods are autonomous. So it's really up to you and your neighbors to decide what you want it to be. There's some kind of core things, some basic things that make a neighborhood pod, but beyond that, you know, it's really up to y'all. So we'll get a little bit into how neighborhood pods could be organized. So a neighborhood pod depends on the coordination of neighbors. That's like that's really what it is, like that hyperlocal coordination of neighbors. And so it can be as simple as you know, forming a group chat so that neighbors can check in on each other and keep each other from boredom. They can be a bit more complex, so like neighbors sharing vegetables from their gardens, or you know, tools from their garages, seeds, or running to the grocery store and bulk buying supplies for each other. And then so from there, you can kind of build up to where neighbors are actually talking to each other about shared problems and aspirations, and come to, shared solutions that they can carry out together to actually meet those needs that they've expressed. So maybe these conversations happen during or after a social gathering. An example, there's too many potholes in the city, or, on your block, and the city isn't getting around to them. So maybe you decide, hey, let's just go fill it ourselves. Or maybe there's a lot of renters who can, give each other advice on, about how to request something from their landlord, those types of things. So I'll give some examples from my own pod. The first thing we did is we got in a group chat. Going back, I guess, a little bit, before the pandemic ever started, I was relatively new to where I live, and I wanted to, go back and, make sure that I met every neighbor. So I was growing a little bit of like medicinal herbs in a herb spiral in my garden, and I just collected some and put them in small little tea-sized bags, like literally I think the bags that like jewelry comes in, and attached little labels to them. And I put the teas, just medicinal teas in there, medicinal herbs, and said, this is how it can be used, this is what it can be used for. And then on the back I had my name, my contact info, and basically just said, our garden is open for y'all to come harvest stuff at any time. So, please come talk to me if you want. If you just want to take some stuff, feel free. And so, honestly though, that took there was a lot of, I guess, nervousness that went into trying to meet my neighbors. I guess I lived here for a little bit, and it just felt weird, like going off and starting. So it actually took about a year for me to really get to know everybody. And I started to build up a way we could all get in touch with each other. And then the pandemic happened, and I was like, okay, I really need to take this really seriously. So I just need to make one more round before this pandemic spreads to here and we can't really see each other. So I did that. We all got in a group chat, and we all started introducing ourselves. Pretty soon after that, the power went out. So normally we'd all be in our houses, individuals, just quite literally in the dark about who has power, who doesn't have power, what is it that does anyone else have access to coffee? I need coffee in the morning, or maybe somebody could let me borrow their shower. All these different things that maybe we could have coordinated, but normally we wouldn't be able to because we weren't in touch. And luckily for us, the power came back on really quick, but from there the ball was kind of rolling. So we we had all introduced ourselves, and then we started sharing. People started sharing veggies from their gardens. A lawnmower was shared, some seeds, some magazines, and eventually one neighbor just said, hey y'all, I'm going to be out in my driveway at 6 p.m. If anyone wants to come out and join me and say hi. And so eventually, we started out a few neighbors out in their driveways and yelling at each other from across the street because we wanted to keep social distance. And then slowly we moved a little bit closer until we got into the cul-de-sac, and we're all sitting 6 feet apart or whatever, and just had a nice discussion. And I think maybe 8 out of the 11 households, something like that, ended up showing up, somebody from 8 of those households. So that was a super cool moment for me. And so, from then we've been working on a few other things. There's been a compost collection and sharing projects in my neighborhood to help produce good soil, to grow more local food in the neighborhoods. And so one collective formed to build as many gardens as possible in people's yards for free. They're even planning to maintain these gardens until they can train people to maintain them themselves. And as part of the deal, I guess volunteers would just take a portion of the harvest and sell it at market, just to recoup their costs. But other than that, the decisions of what to do with all the food is up to the person or people who want the garden built. So, again, those are just some examples, but this pod is what y'all make it. So if we're talking more long-term though about what pods can shape up to be, we believe that they have the real potential to be a building block of dual power, real dual power. So building the kind of trust and connections that will be necessary to shift away from what we currently do is outsource our problems to institutions like politicians, courts, police, HOAs, and shifting away from that and towards coming up with our own internal collective ways of keeping ourselves safe and accountable to one another. So these can be a space, like neighborhood pods could be a space to incubate workers' self-directed enterprises, or co-ops is another example, another word for that, or even like community self-directed enterprises, right? Beyond just the workers in it. They could be the jumping off point for atomized neighborhoods to become social neighborhoods, and social neighborhoods to become what we call political neighborhoods. And so when I'm talking political here, I'm referring to the original Greek meaning of the word political, which is the management of the community by means of direct face-to-face assemblies of the people and the formulation of public policy. So again, moving from atomized communities to social neighborhoods, and from social neighborhoods to political neighborhoods that are self-organizing to meet their needs. So that definition has nothing to do with politicians or parties, and I really want to stress that. So ultimately, the goal, I think a good goal would be to make the state, the broader economy, and all the institutions that everyday neighbors have little to no say over obsolete in our lives. So we do this by organizing our own ways to make decisions that most affect us and meet our own needs, and then link up these pod structures wherever seems necessary. So we've already seen hints of this kind of linkage in the way that pods all over the country have been linked to these larger citywide mutual aid networks. Hayes, did you have anything to add?
No, I don't. Okay. Cool. So yeah, the organization of the pods kind of leads into this point as well about checking in on each other. And this is also just like a little bit of a callback to what I was talking about before, about showing up for each other and interdependence kind of, and how that's a factor of, or could be a factor of a successful neighborhood pod. It's definitely a strength to have. But yeah, so these are just like a couple of different questions that you could ask your neighbors, or that your neighbors might be able to help you with. So I'm just going to give a little bit more detail on each of them. So access to food. Does your neighbor have access to food, or do they need help applying for food stamps, finding mutual aid, or accessing public food pantries and gardens? Access needs. Does your neighbor have specific needs that need to be addressed for their health or ease of access to things, or for quality of life? This can include people who have severe asthma and can't attend public gatherings because other neighbors choose to smoke or wear artificial fragrances or essential oils. So that's just like one example of an access need that somebody in your pod might have. As well, it's important to know that, you can't always predict and plan for every single type of access need. It's important to just make sure that you're specific to the people in your pod, because those needs can vary and they also can conflict. As well, this can include anyone who needs their groceries to be brought to them for whatever reason. You could organize a list of people who need this service. Yeah, and access needs, that is something that can definitely be a very private thing to talk about. So maybe like organizing some kind of way for people to anonymously suggest, ways to facilitate their access need, or those kinds of things, just to make sure those people feel comfortable and also that their needs are met, because those can be things that definitely can impede on their quality of life. Like, they might not be able to go to the store and get groceries for themselves. So that's a really important point there. Problems finding work. Does your neighbor have problems finding work or sustaining themselves? You could help them understand and sign up for unemployment benefits, connect them with mutual aid funds that you know of, or connect them to work that you are aware of. Yeah, so that one's pretty self-explanatory. Unemployment benefits can be really difficult to understand and difficult to access. I know in my town in Albuquerque, there was like this secret phone number that somebody had put on one of the mutual aid Facebook groups about like this person that you just call and you directly get connected to them instead of going through like a call service. And this person like magically like sets you up exactly where you need to be with your unemployment benefits So things like that might be like some hidden knowledge that neighbors might have for each other. Problems with the landlord. Does your neighborhood or community have an issue with the landlord? You could organize collectively to get what you need. That way the leverage is there to secure you. So for example, this was more of an issue earlier in the pandemic, but also continues to this day and might ramp up again, is the fact that people who aren't able to pay, even with a moratorium on evictions for rent-related reasons, landlords will still find a way to evict you for other reasons, like maybe like things that they've been letting slide this whole time, but now with the moratorium, they can't evict you, but they still want money out of you or money out of the unit that you're staying in. So they'll try to evict you for, you know, something wrong with your lawn or something wrong with your patio, or maybe you've had like a roommate there that wasn't on the lease this whole time and now it's a problem because they want to evict you. So if you can get in contact with some of your other neighbors who maybe also are experiencing the same problem, you could come together and be like, well, we're all doing this thing, so you can't evict just like one person for doing this, you know, and then you have the leverage there to make sure that you're not being mistreated by a landlord. Yeah, so then the next point, kind of in the same vein, is legal help. Does your neighbor need help filing a claim, maybe OSHA, etc.? Do you or other neighbors in your pod have varied legal experiences that could benefit each other? And last but definitely not least is community security. Does your neighborhood or community want to explore other options other than being policed? So that could look like maybe mental health groups, or people that are set up to be able to help with like CPR, you know, minor medical emergencies. Sometimes police get sent out for those kinds of things. You know, things that really shouldn't be the police's job, or maybe your community wants to diverge from police altogether, things like that. That might be something y'all could talk about with each other. Do you have anything to add, Ian?
No, that's great.
All right, awesome.
So as far as some other possible projects, I'll just speak about one real quick. Community mapping exercises are potentially a really great way to kind of get to know people, like an icebreaker in your neighborhood. And that'd just be like collaboratively mapping out what's important, what people care about, what kind of places or structures make your neighborhood special. And doing that together, mapping that out together, having those discussions, that back and forth. Again, you know, as Hayes was talking about, that kind of like specialized community knowledge coming to the fore can be really like a nice, beneficial way to get the ball rolling as far as like moving into this more, you know, like taking action type thing together, as opposed to just, you know, getting to know each other, which is super important, by the way. I don't want to understate that. Hayes?
Yeah, so this list of possible projects, all of these do kind of have a similar structure when it gets down to it, but they all have very different and specific benefits. And you might want some of these in your pod, you might want all of them, just depending on, you know, your community need. So the first one on here is tool sharing. So what this could look like is maybe a communal space where people who have tools to donate could put their tools, just with the idea that anybody who needs them would be able to come and get them. Or maybe people put themselves on a list where they're maybe like, I have a hammer that somebody could come borrow. And then they see it on the list and they go knock on his door and they're like, hey, can I use your hammer? I saw it on the list. And with his consent, he would be able to give that person his hammer, those kinds of things. Community gardens, same thing. There might be a communal area that is being used as a garden. As well, people might want to offer their own private gardens for people to come and use communally, or maybe people would want to share their vegetables voluntarily, like just dropping them at people's doors, those kinds of things. Compost collection. So that could look like yeah, that could look like maybe there is a communal compost area that people just go and put their compostable materials in voluntarily. Or maybe somebody has volunteered to go knocking door to door with a list of acceptable things for compost, and they like ask those things of their neighbors. Or maybe there's like a designated person where people go and drop their compost off at their house. It could look like that. Compost collection is really interesting because it is also about waste reduction. It can make you more conscious of the kind of waste that you create because you're, conscious of like, okay, this is going in the compost bin. Like maybe you buy things that use less packaging because of that, because you're going to use like maybe your banana peels or your orange peels for the compost or something like that. As well, it's a really good icebreaker. Compost collection could be something that you use when you go knocking door to door to be like, hi, do you have any biodegradable waste that I can use to turn to compost, and we can return it to each other and use in our gardens, those kinds of things. Next is a block food bank or free pantry. So this one is really cool because it involves communication between neighbors about pooling resources, maybe like bulk buying certain things, like maybe one person has a Costco membership and everybody chips in to get like bulk flour or something. So not one person has like, this giant bag of flour sitting in their cabinet for who knows how long, and everybody's actually using it. Those kinds of things. Or maybe they have canned food that they're not going to be using and they put it in the free pantry. As well, things like clothes that their kids outgrow could be used by somebody else whose kids are growing into that size, or books and movies and games that, you can just like share around your pod. That is always a fun activity to do. Next is skill sharing. And skill sharing is really important to do because you might need like maybe your roof repaired or something, and there's somebody in your pod that is able to repair roofs, and then you don't have to call a roofer to do it for you. Which is good just for reducing the amount of people that come in and out of the pod. Like maybe your pod becomes like, a quarantine bubble, and you don't have to have like some stranger come in and then repair your roof. Same thing with like, maybe like plumbing issues. Someone has like an idea. They're like, you don't have to call somebody for that. I know how to do it this way. So that's what skill sharing could look like as well. Another really important skill that could be shared is things like web development. With a lot of businesses and things moving online, maybe somebody in your pod knows how to just like set up an online business, and you could like trade labor to set that up and move your business online. That way, like, you can keep your business running, and then maybe this person now, like, you give them money or labor or something in return. So that's what skill sharing can look like. And then movie nights and block parties. Ian, actually, I think I'll let you take that one since you have some experience with that.
Yeah, sweet. So, like recently, one of our point persons, and we'll get into that terminology in a little bit, but a point person of a different neighborhood pod here in Denton is letting me borrow his projector, and I've been borrowing it for a while now, saying that I was going to like invite all my neighbors to have a movie night, and a couple of times it didn't work out. Well, we had a movie night. It was our first one. It was my family, another family, and then one person from another family, and the rest of the family couldn't make it that time. But so basically three families, and one of them was like the family that we knew the least on the street, and so that was so exciting that they came, and we watched Friday Night Lights together, and then they got really into the whole concept of having movie nights. So basically they're building us a screen now. We were just projecting it up on the side of my house, which was cool, but like they have this idea for building a screen. They've already built it. It looks awesome. And, maybe we are going to talk about like going in together as a block on projectors. And then this weekend, so it's going to be like every 2 weeks, we're going to have a movie night until it gets too cold. So this weekend, we're starting the Harry Potter series with the first one, trying to get ways to like, well, first off, a lot of us are like, millennials or parents of millennials and grew up on Harry Potter. So that's always good. But then also, the kid on the street, and we only have one, but the kid on the street can come to something. So super excited about that. We're going to be doing that this weekend. And then, so I mean, this has to be fun, right? Like, you can't just have a neighborhood pod where it's all business all the time, or it's going to suck. everybody's already drained, everybody's already tired from a long week. So fun times are really integral to the pod. Any group or society should make time for fun just for the sake of it. And it helps improve mental, physical health, as well as provide a break from the stressors and work. And it comes to a place where everybody kind of joins together. And so that's really exciting. Speaking of joining together on Skillshares as well, we've talked about, I've got like Mustang grapes, I've got dewberries and some other like foraged foods that are put up in my freezer right now, and probably gonna get some beauty berries as well. And I think we're gonna have a big, like, I don't know exactly how to do it yet with, the whole COVID thing, but there's definitely interest in like having a big jelly making workshop, and we're just gonna make a bunch of jelly, and jam. So that's gonna be super exciting. And I just discovered persimmons, which I don't know why I never had a persimmon before, but it's just amazing. And for my sister who's in this chat, or in this meeting, I let her have one the other day. And just a couple of days ago, I didn't really know how to like ascertain a ripe and an unripe persimmon. So there was still some kind of negative side effects of eating that persimmon for her. But now I figured it out. And I found like a huge grove of persimmon trees, and made like persimmon bread pudding. And so anyway, we're gonna have like hopefully like a persimmon making, or like persimmon cook-off or something. I don't know. So like using that kind of local, those local like wild ingredients can always be a fun way to like build a sense of shared communal belonging and a relationship to the place that you live. So thanks for letting me nerd out about that. I love to do that.
Yeah, I'm so jealous. A persimmon grove? Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was the greatest find.
Nice. Cool. Also, I cannot believe you've gone this long without eating a persimmon. Okay, so yeah, I don't have anything to add to that. I'll just let you keep going.
Cool. So I mentioned that word point people, point person, and it's a fancy word, but really like a point person, they're not somebody who's in charge of their neighbors or anything like another petty HOA tyrant, right? They're just the first person taking the initiative to go out and meet their neighbors. A role of coordination, not power. So by going through this training, you're actually like basically a point person, or at least you got the skills to be a point person if you would like to do that. And then through presentations like these, through group chats and different things like that. Also, if you're in Denton on this chat, especially hit me up. We need to get you in our local group chats. But you might also be in communication with other point people in your city, or even broader, just to stay in the loop with what's happening elsewhere. And so we'll get into that in a bit. But you can be thinking about people who might potentially be great point persons, and please invite them to our coming workshops. They're every 2 weeks, and yeah, that'd be awesome. Let's see. So now to get into the real practical, how do I reach out to my neighbors? Well, that's the most important step of building a neighborhood pod. You gotta get in touch with your neighbors and get them all in contact in some sort of way. So we've got this flyer, and at the very end of this this PowerPoint, which we share with everybody, everything that we say tonight, all the words basically that we speak, all of the links, everything will be available for y'all to access after this. So we have a flyer that'll be linked, and you can leave it on people's doors, and it basically just says, hey, I'm your neighbor, and I'd love for neighbors to get in touch, so we can check in on each other during the pandemic and beyond the pandemic. And yeah, it's real simple. And here's my contact info, get in touch. So we found much better success if you actually like physically knock on people's doors, leave the flyer and maybe step back a ways to maintain social distancing, but explain what you're doing so they don't just like throw away your paper thinking it's an ad. And it helps, it really does help when people can put a face to a name. So yeah, and that's been more effective by far for people than like leaving flyers in mailboxes, which is actually illegal. Or like, you know, you could just get a rubber band and attach it to their doorknob or something like that. But yeah, again, there's always the risk that they could just throw that away. So a buddy system that we highly recommend you bringing a buddy with you, both for safety, but also for comfort. And since like the whole point of the pods is to combat isolation, meeting neighbors and partnership with other neighbors kind of puts that into practice from the beginning. You know, you start off on a really good foot of, hey, I'm not going to do this solo. I'm not going to do anything solo. I'm going to, you know, anything to do with neighbors, I'm going to do it with other neighbors, building up those connections, right? So the flyer will have your contact info, and once people start to call or text you back, the best thing to do is to talk to them. Well, it's really like the first step would be to find, you know, create some sort of directory. That's always a good way, like some sort of contact sheet where everybody has, you know, kind of everybody's info. It would have basic things like, you know, name, like names of the people living in the house, what house number, phone numbers, emails, that kind of stuff. But also things like what skills or interests you might want to share with neighbors, people's specific needs during the pandemic, any emergency or medical context that they might want to share, right? We have a template with all this stuff. Another thing on there is, would you be okay, or like, do you have the capability to be added to some sort of group contact on the smartphone? Can you download smartphone apps like Signal or WhatsApp? You know, we'll get into those tech terms, but you know, finding that out can be really important. So for that contact sheet, that directory, we've used Google Sheets, and you can just make a copy of ours and use it for your own needs. And that's really great because it's like a collaborative spreadsheet that allows everyone to edit their own, you know, information simultaneously. But if there's like people that aren't very tech savvy in your pod, it does require some kind of extra troubleshooting. So what I do is I print out a sheet for my non-technical neighbors, and just every time there's like a change, somebody edits something or whatever, I'll just go over to their house or call them up and edit it with a pin. You know, make sure that it gets manually edited for them, or that they edit it by calling them and making sure that it happens, right? So getting that like directory is huge, but really the most important thing is some sort of group communication. So that could be like a group chat, like you know, like one of those apps on the phone. It could be a group text, although sometimes that can lead to some problems if you have different type of smartphone providers. If everyone's in group text, sometimes it doesn't format correctly, or maybe not everybody can see it, those types of things. So like one of those messaging apps like Signal or WhatsApp could be helpful, and we can talk about tech terms later. But or it could be like an old-fashioned phone tree, which is kind of like that game Telephone, where you know one neighbor commits to calling another neighbor, and then that neighbor might call two neighbors, and those neighbors might call two more neighbors until everyone has been reached out. Or you don't even have to call. You could just, you know, one person commits to knocking on one neighbor's door, and then so on, right? So it can be as high tech or low tech as you need it, but that's kind of, as a point person, you'll be kind of figuring out where people are at as far as tech, that kind of stuff. But really the point is, like, whatever you do, you at least want to get into group communication where all of your neighbors can communicate with each other, not just you communicating to them, because that does put quite a bit of like power and all the responsibility in your hands. Whereas, you know, as I mentioned earlier, by not doing that, it was one of my neighbors who organized our first gathering together, which was really cool. But from there, like I said, it's really up to you what your pod is once you're all in contact with one another. Hayes, do you have anything to add?
No, I don't.
Okay. So there's really a lot of benefit that can come from this point, from pods connecting with one another. So again, if you're in Denton, we would love to get in touch with you about getting on our point persons group chat that allows us all to communicate. And you might find benefit in creating something similar where you live. So you could use that to arrange the printing of flyers between those who need printing and those who have printers. You could share best practices. So like this worked really well when reaching out to neighbors and this didn't. Or you can talk about ideas for projects, or you can organize kind of, group things between multiple pods. Multiple pods could come together in an assembly setting to work on joint projects together or to discuss shared issues. For example, like going back to the pothole analogy, let's just say it's a road that has full of potholes and it goes between multiple pods. So those pods might discuss like pooling their money together and bulk buying Quikrete or something like that, and then working together to fill the potholes, right? So you might find it easiest, instead of having every single person in all of the pods coming together in a giant meeting, you might find it easier to have those meetings through the point persons. But in such a case, that would give the point persons a lot of responsibility. So you might find it makes more sense to have point persons rotating so that everybody can share those tasks and no one gains too much power. Or maybe point persons are elected at some point, and they're held accountable by the whole pod. Because I really need to stress here that point persons should never be making decisions for the pod, right? Again, we're not trying to be the HOA representatives or politicians or anything like that, right? They're only there, the point persons are only there to be the mouthpiece, voicing shared decisions of the whole pod to other pods for coordination. Anything, Hayes, you want to add before I move into the organizing tips?
No, there's nothing I want to add.
Okay, so just a few more organizing tips. So setting a deadline for yourself on making rounds or gathering contact info. So that can always be helpful, just in anything you do. Setting like some sort of deadline. You don't have to stick to it. You don't have to stress out over it, but just, hey, I'm going to try to do this by this point. But then again, if you're one of those people who like needs a little extra support on that, you could ask somebody to remind you. That is, going to be very important in that, to make sure things get done. Sometimes if you say it out loud to another person, you've got more of a chance of getting it done. Asking someone to go with you. So again, this can be very important for safety or to alleviate anxiety. So feel free to reach out to us or our other neighborhood point people, and maybe somebody can go with you as well. Splitting up the outreach. So you might find a neighbor or multiple neighbors who are very excited about the idea. They're friendly, they're personable, and they feel comfortable talking to other neighbors. And you might see, hey, do you want to split up the houses? I'll take these and you take these. We've had a couple of people do that to great success. In finding this neighbor, so what qualities are you looking for? You might look for somebody who's well-liked over a Facebook group in your pod area, for instance, or next door, like they're kind of popular in that way, or by word of mouth, somebody who's friendly, who takes initiative, who's well-organized, or this is a really crucial one, has a track record of resolving conflicts in the neighborhood, right? A lot of neighborhoods have somebody like that. So that could be someone to look out for, as like, hey, maybe this person might be someone that can really go and do this thing with me. You can brainstorm the social groups that exist in your neighborhood. So like what kind of characteristics could socially unite neighbors, or what kind of characteristics could socially divide neighbors, so that you can come up with different ways to approach people and win them over to participating. A few more tips, if there's someone that is like, you're really trying to get join the pod, maybe you've got everyone on your block except like one person. and they're hesitant, right? First thing you can do is you can listen to them, really find out like what is it that they're saying about the pod that they're hesitant about. Always assuming good faith is like always a really important just precedent or like kind of guideline to follow. Don't assume that somebody's like hates you for no reason, right? Like they may really like, yeah, they might really just feel like there's some way that they're not having their needs met, like there's some sort of barrier to them participating, right? Which gets into troubleshooting technological problems possibly, right? Or other barriers to participation. Again, is it a thing that every time you and your neighbors meet, everyone's smoking and drinking, and maybe they're, they can't really be around cigarette smoke, or like they're a recovering alcoholic and can't be in like situations where people are drinking, those types of things, right? You can, so yeah, assuming good faith, you can reframe the conversation in a way that they can understand. That can always be really helpful. You can appeal to their self-interest or address the needs that they might have. You can work on their friends or surrounding neighbors, so finding someone that they do know and do like, right? And getting them to, if maybe they join, then that friend will join too. You can organize things with the other neighbors in the pods that are just too good to pass up. So a little bit of peer pressure, right? That looks way too fun. I got to get involved. That actually did kind of happen in our pod as well. Somebody who wasn't really answering my messages very much, but they did come outside when we were all gathering, and they've become a part of the thing now, right? So, yeah. Hayes, anything to add before I cover this one?
Nope, go ahead.
Okay, so this, it can be really tempting to divide up your block into potential allies and people you might want to avoid. Or just to gather up all the completely like-minded people on your block, the people who are from your subculture or your social group, right? But we highly encourage you to reach out to everyone in that general area, even if they hold a completely different worldview, different political beliefs, those types of things. It's okay and even beneficial to maybe start with people you know or who might be like-minded, and maybe you can even enlist their help to come up with ways to frame the pod to people you might think you'll have a lot of differences with. But first of all, like deep-rooted societal change will only happen when we break free of this subcultural mindset. So the picture above, it's from Northeast Syria, where these radical ideas of direct democracy, of women's liberation and ecology are being put into place on a scale unmatched anywhere in the world, despite being an area filled with very conservative tribes and a very religious society. The work of organizing everyone is paying off because many of these tribes are now sending their sons and daughters to participate actively in the revolution, because they see these structures as, offering more materially than any of the alternatives, even if they don't completely agree on everything. So that picture there, and that quote, "We organize society, not subcultures," that comes from Northeast Syria. And that's kind of like a slogan that we've taken as well. Like, we are all society. And so we're organizing everybody because we don't have to agree on everything to work together on common projects. And usually when we look at that hyper-local level, a lot of the partisanship and, who someone supports in a national election, et cetera, it just starts to not matter as much. And, it may matter a little bit more these next few weeks as people start to put out their political signs in their yards and stuff like that. But really, like when you're focusing on local projects, hyper-local projects, it just doesn't matter as much. So as long as we can agree on this basis right here, that neighbors can come together to work on common projects without relying on or outsourcing our problems to the state, to political parties, or other outside entities, then there's plenty of common ground to be found. I've heard very conservative Trump supporters suggesting, building tool libraries and common storehouses for dry goods like flour and sugar, as Hayes was saying earlier, before they even knew that such projects already existed and are part of different people's community projects, right? I've been together with libertarian municipalists and other anti-authoritarians to help poor undocumented tenants, or, I've been with Muslim and Christian and atheist groups working hand in hand cleaning up after a natural disaster. It is through working together and realizing our shared interests and the beauties of autonomy, grassroots democracy, and mutual aid that we find common ground worth stoking and defending. So at People's Council of Texas, we see the state as this entity that's always trying to usurp the self-organization of society, regardless of what subcultures we divide ourselves into. So we might as well strengthen society to gain more say and autonomy over our lives. Wrapping up here, let me just do a quick technical explainer of some of the online resources we've been using. So I mentioned Signal a couple of times. That's where we do a lot of our communication between point persons. It really checks off a lot of different boxes. It is very simple to use. It's free. And for those worried about security, it's an encrypted chat, right? So, and there's a lot of people, like especially elderly neighbors, if they are on technology, a lot of them are more hyper vigilant about like their security, having their identity stolen, those types of things, right? Because again, we know that a lot of people prey on more vulnerable populations in our community. So that's always a good one. But it has just one channel or thread per chat. So it's good for like a single issue group without a lot of committees. But for more complex organizations or coordinations with a lot of committees that all want to communicate in the same workspace, we've been using apps like Discord or Slack. So both allow for multiple channels in the same place, which makes coordinating large groups pretty easy. I guess, by channels, you could think about like internet forums and all the subforums they have, or Reddit, something like that. Email newsletter, that's a really great communal project for a neighborhood pod, and it helps keep not as active residents in the loop. I mentioned earlier the phone trees and the reaching out to your neighbor slide. Most of our documents were originally posted on Google Drive here, but which is a cloud-based storage that allows you to create and store Word documents, PowerPoints, forms, spreadsheets, those types of things for free online. But we're starting to move over to a more secure and encrypted website with basically the exact same features, and that's CryptPad. And that's just an effort to move away from like these big tech companies. Further resources, just this will all be available to you. Again, when we gotta, we're gonna be sharing this, the link to this PowerPoint in the chat. But these are some other things that can be helpful for you. So again, we've got the flyers to hand out to your neighbors under the more easily printable outreach template. We've got a neighbor directory. So that's, a template of that, like you can make a copy of that template about, the directory for your neighbors, and you can customize it to your liking. We've got a template contact sheet for point persons in your community. So that would only be shared within the pods, and it would allow different pods to get in touch with other pods and get an idea of where you have pods and where you don't have pods. This next slide of resources is more related to, again, I talked about what's happening in Northeast Syria, where the Kurds, the Assyrian people, the Arabs, and the Yazidis in Northeast Syria, also known as Rojava, have spent the last 9 years dealing with like the same sort of uncertainty, but of course much worse, that we're just now beginning to face. And they responded to it by turning to their neighbors to get themselves through like civil war, through ISIS attacks, and they're emerging through it all with this society that's just very beautiful. So this is a real story of hope that I would love to share with y'all, and it can kind of give an idea of what some of this could look like in practice. And if you watch this and you enjoy it, we have a a study club that we've been doing, and we also do screenings of this. And there's some other, there's some other related links in the chat here, reading lists and notes and things like that. Yeah. Hayes?
All right. So yeah, we mentioned that we do this workshop every other week on Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Texas. And we do a follow-up meeting in between those weeks at the same day and time. And what that is just kind of like a more like loosely formatted kind of happy hour, we call it, where you can just come and share some questions, comments, concerns, maybe progress in your pod. That's kind of like what the meeting was like designed for. But most of the time it ends up just being like a, like a meeting where, we just like share whatever's on our mind, topically or not. So come to that. If you want the link for it, I believe it's a different link than this one, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
So we share it every single week in the Discord server as well. You can email me or Ian for it. You can email me now, and then I can make sure to, oh my goodness, I'm typing in emojis. Okay. You can email me now, and I can make sure that when the time comes to send the link that I have your email. Oops, not Gmail, iCloud. Yeah, Xanthopy@iCloud. Yeah, otherwise, you can message us on Discord too. And my Discord tag is the following. 6454. Yep, that's my Discord. Yeah, so that's how you can get the link for that. Anything you want to add, Ian?
Yeah, so just to clarify, that's the People's Council of Texas Discord. I know some of y'all might be on that, some not. But it's a cool space where we talk about building real community power. So we'd love to have you all on there.